The first thing one notices underground is not darkness, but silence. Darkness can be challenged by a lamp, a torch, a shaft of daylight falling through a narrow opening in the stone. But silence settles deeper. It presses against the walls. It waits in the carved rooms below the earth, in the cool tunnels where footsteps return as soft echoes, in storage chambers where grain once breathed in the dark, in hidden passages where families may have crouched while soldiers crossed the land above them, beneath the fields, beneath vanished houses, beneath churches, temples, courtyards, and forgotten streets. There is another ancient world. It is not the world of monuments rising proudly into the sun, not the world of pyramids, palaces, towers, or city gates. It is a world built downward, into shadow, into stone, into the body of the earth itself. Across many ancient landscapes, people did not only build upward to show power, they also dug downward to survive. They opened caves, widened cracks, cut corridors through soft rock, hollowed chambers beneath settlements, and connected them with shafts for air, wells for water, and passages narrow enough to slow an enemy. In some places, the underground was a refuge. In others, it was a tomb, a temple, a mine, a storehouse, a water system, or a place where the living believed they could approach the dead. What survives in the record suggests that ancient civilizations understood the ground beneath them not as empty space, but as a second landscape, hidden from the sky and yet intimately tied to everyday life. Imagine a dry plateau at dusk. The wind moves over low hills, vineyards, stone houses, and old paths worn pale by centuries of feet. Nothing on the surface looks impossible. A village rests quietly under the open sky. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Animals shift in their pens. Children move between doorways. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, the stairs descend into another settlement entirely. There are rooms carved into rock, places for sleeping, cooking, storing food, pressing grapes, keeping animals, gathering water and praying. Heavy circular stone doors stand ready to roll across narrow passages. Air shafts drop from above like dark wells. The underground city does not announce itself. It waits. It is a civilization's answer to danger, climate, and time, hidden so carefully that parts of it could sleep beneath human feet for generations. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The hidden underground world of ancient civilizations is not one mystery, but many. It begins with a basic human instinct: the surface is not always safe. Above ground, crops can fail, armies can arrive, storms can tear through a settlement, heat can become unbearable, water can vanish, rulers can demand labor, and enemies can see where people live. Below ground, conditions change, temperature steadies, light disappears, sound alters, space becomes harder to find, harder to enter, harder to conquer. The earth can be a shelter, a barrier, a storage vessel, and a memory chamber all at once. This is why the underground appears again and again in the archaeological record, not as a single invention passed neatly from one culture to another, but as a recurring solution to problems faced by human communities in very different places. There is something deeply practical about many of these spaces. A cellar keeps food cool, a cave offers immediate shelter, a tunnel can move water, a shaft can reach minerals, a burial chamber protects the dead from animals and weather, a hidden room protects the living from violence. Yet practicality alone does not explain the power these places held. Ancient people often treated the underground as more than a useful cavity. The descent itself mattered. To go beneath the surface was to cross a boundary. The world above belonged to daylight, fields, markets, rulers, and visible life. The world below belonged to ancestors, hidden forces, stored wealth, secret knowledge, and sometimes fear. The same darkness that protected grain could also protect ritual. The same chamber that saved a family in war could later become a legend. Scholars still debate how to interpret many underground sites because the evidence remains incomplete. A chamber carved into rock may have served several purposes across centuries. A refuge might later become a monastery. A cave shrine might begin as a natural shelter. A water tunnel might be reused as a hiding place. A tomb might be robbed, repaired, forgotten, and rediscovered in a condition that tells only part of its story. Underground spaces are especially difficult to understand because they often preserve details beautifully while also removing them from their living context. A wall niche survives, but the object inside it is gone. A tunnel remains, but the people who moved through it left no written explanation. A ventilation shaft still breathes, but the fear that made it necessary has vanished into history. This is part of what makes the underground so compelling. It is physical evidence with missing voices. The walls are there. The chisel marks are there. The soot on the ceiling. The steps worn by feet. The blocked passage. The chamber too small for comfort. The drain cut with practical precision. The burial niche sealed in stone, all of these survive. But they do not speak plainly. They suggest. They invite reconstruction. They resist certainty. No single explanation fully accounts for the underground world because the underground was never just one thing. In the ancient Near East, people cut storage pits, tombs, water channels, and defensive tunnels into the earth. In Egypt, the most famous monuments rise above the desert, but some of the most intimate evidence of belief lies below it. In tomb chambers painted for eternity and corridors meant to protect a soul's journey. Around the Mediterranean, cities built cisterns, drains, sewers, quarries, catacombs, and hidden passages, creating layers beneath the streets that later generations would inherit without always understanding them. In Anatolia, entire underground settlements formed inside soft volcanic rock. In the deserts of Iran and beyond, qanats carried water through long subterranean channels, turning dry landscapes into livable ones. In Mesoamerica, caves could become sacred openings into the earth, places associated with rain, fertility, ancestors, and the origins of peoples. In Europe, prehistoric communities entered deep caves and left images, tools, bones, and traces of activity in spaces where darkness itself seems to have been part of the meaning. These places do not form a single lost global civilization, despite the claims that sometimes gather around them. Popular theories often imagine vast secret networks connecting continents, hidden masters, or forgotten technologies that mainstream history has supposedly ignored. Such ideas are usually unsupported, and they flatten the true strangeness of the evidence. The real story is more interesting because it is more human. Different societies, facing different pressures, discovered that the earth beneath them could be shaped into shelter, memory, power, and survival. They did not need to share one secret origin. They shared a body, a climate, a fear of death, a need for water, a need for food, and a knowledge that stone can outlast almost everything. The underground also changes how civilization is seen. On the surface, ancient societies often appear through their most visible achievements: temples, walls, roads, statues, inscriptions, and ruined capitals. These are the things that catch sunlight and attract armies of visitors. But beneath them lies another record, less concerned with display and more concerned with endurance. A palace tells us how rulers wanted to be seen. A buried grain chamber tells us what people feared losing. A ceremonial cave tells us where they imagined the world opened into something older than kings. A water tunnel tells us how carefully a city planned for thirst. A refuge city tells us that ordinary life could be interrupted by danger so severe that people prepared to disappear below ground. This hidden world is not always grand. Some of it is cramped, smoky, and uncomfortable. Some of it smells, even now, of damp stone, mineral dust, and old earth. Some passages force the body to bend. Some chambers are so low that a person cannot stand fully upright. This matters. Ancient underground architecture was not only a triumph of engineering, it was also an experience of the body. To descend into it was to feel temperature drop, air thicken, light weaken, and orientation fade. The surface world becomes distant very quickly. A few turns can remove the sky completely. A person underground depends on memory, lamps, companions, and trust in the people who carved the space before them. The first layer of this story, then, is not a single discovery, but a shift in perspective. Ancient civilizations were not only built in sunlight, they were also built in shadow. They extended downward as much as upward, into chambers where grain survived winters, where water moved unseen, where the dead were arranged for eternity, where miners laboured for metals that would become weapons and ornaments, where priests and pilgrims entered sacred darkness, and where frightened communities waited for danger to pass overhead. To understand those civilizations fully, one has to follow them below the surface, into places where the evidence is quieter, colder, and often more honest than the monuments above. And once that descent begins, the ancient world becomes less familiar. The city is no longer only walls and streets. The temple is no longer only columns and altars. The landscape is no longer only what can be seen from the horizon. Beneath it all, another geography opens, carved, buried, adapted, feared, and remembered. It is a geography made by hands, but also by geology, by war, by drought, by belief, and by the long patience of stone. The surface may collapse, burn, erode, or be rebuilt by strangers, but underground, in the steady dark, traces remain. Long before an underground city becomes a mystery, it begins as a need. Someone looks at a landscape and understands that the surface has limits. The sun is too hot, the winter is too sharp, food spoils too quickly, water disappears into dry ground. Enemies can see smoke, roofs, animals, and movement from far away. The dead cannot simply be left to weather and scavengers. The living cannot always trust the open horizon. So the first descent is often not dramatic at all. It's a practical cut into earth. A hollow under a house, a pit sealed against dampness, a cave widened by hand, a passage open toward water, a chamber made cool by soil and stone. From such ordinary decisions, the underground world begins to grow. For ancient communities, the earth itself offered one of the most reliable forms of protection from climate. Below the surface, temperature changes more slowly. A room cut into rock may remain cooler in summer and warmer in winter than a house exposed to wind, sun, and frost. This simple fact shaped habits across many regions. In hot lands, underground or semi-underground spaces could protect people and stored goods from heat. In cold or windy lands, sunken floors and earth-covered structures could hold warmth better than thin walls alone. These were not mysterious technologies. They were careful observations repeated over generations. People learned where air moved, where moisture gathered, where stone stayed dry, and where a chamber could preserve what the surface would ruin. Food made the underground especially valuable. Grain is civilization's promise to the future, but it is also fragile. It can rot, burn, be stolen, eaten by insects, spoiled by damp, or lost to a bad season, storage pits, silos, cellars, and sealed chambers appear across ancient societies because survival often depends on protecting harvests after the harvest is over. A field feeds people only if its produce can be kept. In many villages, the most important hidden space may not have been a secret tunnel or sacred chamber, but a storage pit lined, sealed, and watched with quiet anxiety. What survives in the record suggests that stored grain was more than food. It was insurance against drought, war, taxation, winter, and famine. An underground chamber full of barley or wheat could mean the difference between endurance and collapse. The same logic applied to wine, oil, roots, seeds, dried meat, and other supplies. Underground spaces could keep them stable, concealed, and protected. They could also become tools of power. Whoever controlled storage controlled time itself. A ruler, temple, estate, or village headman who had access to protected reserves could survive shortages that destroyed others. This is one reason archaeology often finds storage and administration intertwined. The underground was not always a place of escape from authority. Sometimes it strengthened authority by allowing wealth to be collected, guarded, and redistributed. A buried storehouse can be as political as a palace, though it speaks in quieter terms. Water drove people downward with equal force. On the surface, water is visible but vulnerable. Rivers flood, wells dry, springs shift, and enemies can poison or block access. In dry regions, the search for reliable water encouraged some of the most impressive subterranean engineering of the ancient world. Communities dug wells, channels, tunnels, and cisterns to catch, move, and preserve water beyond the reach of sun and evaporation. The underground became a hidden circulatory system. A city might appear to live by its walls, markets, and temples, but beneath it, water moved through stone-cut channels, settling basins, drains, and reservoirs. Without that hidden system, the surface life could not continue. The work was dangerous and exacting. Digging a channel through earth or rock required knowledge of slope, soil, airflow, collapse, and maintenance. Too steep, and water could damage the passage. Too shallow, and it would stagnate. Too poorly supported, and the tunnel might fail. No single explanation fully accounts for how different ancient communities developed such skill, because methods varied widely by region and geology. Yet the broader pattern is clear where water was uncertain. Underground engineering often became a form of survival. The people who mastered it could settle where others could not. Warfare added another reason to vanish below. Ancient conflict was not only the clash of armies on open ground, it was the burning of crops, the seizure of animals, the destruction of homes, the taking of captives, and the slow pressure of siege. For villagers and townspeople, the most terrifying danger might be the sudden arrival of raiders rather than the formal campaign of a king. A hidden chamber, a concealed passage, or a cave system near a settlement could offer a brief but vital refuge. In some places, underground spaces became more elaborate over time because danger was not rare enough to ignore. Entrances were hidden, passages were narrowed, doors were made heavy, air shafts were disguised. Rooms were arranged so that people could wait, breathe, and survive without immediately revealing themselves. These places were not comfortable shelters in the modern sense. They were emergency landscapes. Smoke from lamps could sting the eyes. Animals kept below would add heat, smell, and noise. Food and water had to be stored carefully. Waste had to be managed. Fear would have moved through the chambers as surely as air. Still, the underground offered one powerful advantage: it made a community harder to erase. An enemy could burn a house, but not always find the rooms beneath it. An army could cross a field without knowing that people were listening below. The evidence remains incomplete at many refuge sites, but the physical design often reveals the intention. Narrow corridors, blocking stones, hidden entrances, ventilation, and storage all point toward a world prepared for danger from above. Burial carried people underground for different reasons. The dead required places that were protected, meaningful, and separated from daily movement. A grave is one of the simplest forms of underground architecture, yet it opens into some of the deepest human questions. To bury a body is to place it into the earth, and also into memory. Over time, burial chambers, tombs, catacombs, and necropolises turn the underground into a landscape of ancestors. In some societies, the dead rested beneath houses or near settlements. In others, they occupied separate cities of stone, arranged by status, family, office, or belief. The underground gave the dead durability. It shielded them from weather. It also created a boundary. The living could visit, honor, fear, or avoid them. But the descent marked a change in state. There is a surprising intimacy in many ancient underground spaces. They are not always made for crowds or spectacle. Some are made for a few bodies, a few jars, a few lamps, a family's memory. Others are built at great scale, yet still depend on the same basic human acts: carrying, cutting, sealing, hiding, preserving. The underground world is therefore not separate from ordinary life. It is ordinary life under pressure. It is the place people turn when the surface is too exposed, too hot, too dry, too violent, too brief. This is why underground construction appears again and again without needing a single origin. Climate teaches it. Hunger teaches it. Water teaches it. War teaches it. Death teaches it. Belief gives it depth. But necessity often opens the first door. Once that door exists, once a people learn that the earth below them can hold food, water, bodies, secrets, and hope, the ground itself begins to change meaning. It is no longer just something walked upon. It becomes a second architecture, waiting beneath the visible world. The decision to go underground was human, but the shape of the underground world was chosen by geology long before any hand lifted a tool. People could imagine hidden rooms, protected stores, sacred chambers, or escape passages, but stone decided what was possible. Some landscapes welcomed digging. Others resisted it with a hardness that could exhaust generations. A civilization might want a tunnel, but the earth answered in layers: soft volcanic ash, brittle limestone, heavy clay, loose sand. Sandstone, basalt, chalk, granite, salt, gypsum, and fractured mountain rock. The hidden architecture beneath ancient settlements was never built in empty space. It was negotiated with the material character of the ground. This is why underground worlds look so different from one region to another. In places shaped by volcanic eruptions, ash and tuff could harden into rock soft enough to carve but strong enough to hold a chamber. In limestone country, water had already begun the work, dissolving passages, hollows, sinkholes, and caves over immense spans of time. In desert cliffs, people could cut into dry stone and create shaded rooms protected from heat. In clay-rich soils, pits and sunken structures might be easier to make, but also more vulnerable to collapse and damp. In hard, crystalline rock, every metre required immense effort. Ancient builders did not simply impose their plans on the earth. They listened to the ground with tools, experience, and sometimes with painful mistakes. Soft rock was one of the great invitations. Volcanic tuff, especially, appears almost designed for underground settlement, though it is only the accidental gift of ancient eruptions. When ash, pumice, and volcanic debris settle and compact, they can form a material that is relatively easy to cut with simple tools, yet after exposure it may become more stable. This combination made it possible in some regions to hollow out rooms, churches, stables, passages, and even multi-level underground complexes. The rock could be shaped quickly compared with harder stone, but not so loosely that every chamber collapsed at once. It created a strange partnership between catastrophe and shelter. What began as volcanic destruction could, much later, become a refuge for human life. Limestone offered a different kind of opportunity. It is not only a building material, it is a landscape that water can slowly open from within. Rainwater, made slightly acidic by carbon dioxide, seeps into cracks and dissolves the rock grain by grain. Over thousands or millions of years, caves, chambers, and subterranean streams can form naturally. Ancient people found these openings and gave them new purposes. Some caves became shelters, some became ritual spaces, some became burial places. Some were extended, shaped, walled, or connected to other features. In karst landscapes, the boundary between natural and human-made space can be difficult to draw. A chamber may begin as a geological hollow and later become a shrine. A passage may be widened by tools but follow a route first made by water. Scholars still debate the meaning of many cave sites because geology and culture are interwoven so tightly that neither can be understood alone. Desert cliffs produced another form of hidden life. In dry regions, rock faces could be cut into dwellings, tombs, monasteries, and storage rooms, using the cliff itself as wall, roof, and insulation. The advantage was immediate. A chamber inside a cliff is shaded, cooler than the exposed surface, and often easier to defend than a freestanding building. It also protects against wind and, in some environments, against the slow damage of rain. The cliff becomes a vertical city edge, a place where people can live not fully underground, but not fully exposed either. Such spaces remind us that the underground world is not always beneath the feet. Sometimes it is within the side of a mountain, tucked between sunlight and darkness. The material also shaped the tools. A tunnel through soft tuff might be carved with picks, chisels, hammers, and baskets for removing debris. A mine through hard rock required fire setting, wedges, pounding stones, metal tools, and brutal patience. Fire setting was one of the more dramatic techniques used in some ancient mining contexts. Rock could be heated with fire and then cooled, causing it to crack and making it easier to break. The method was effective, but dangerous in confined spaces where smoke, heat, and falling stone threatened the workers. What survives in the record suggests that underground labour was often skilled, organised, and physically costly. The smoothness of a finished chamber can hide the violence of its making. The shape of tunnels reveals this conversation with stone. Passages are rarely random. They follow layers, avoid unstable zones, exploit cracks, or bend around harder obstacles. Ceilings may be arched, vaulted, flat, or irregular depending on the material. Supports may be left as pillars cut from the same rock, or added later in timber, brick, or stone. Ventilation shafts might rise where the rock permits. Drainage channels might be cut along floors to manage seepage. In some places, ancient builders clearly understood that an underground space could kill if it was not managed properly. Bad air, flooding, collapse, darkness, and disorientation were not minor inconveniences. They were constant dangers built into the very idea of going below. One lesser-known detail is that underground sites often preserve construction sequences more clearly than surface buildings. On the surface, Later rebuilding can erase earlier stages underground, abandoned tool marks, unfinished chambers, blocked passages, and changes in cutting style may remain sealed in darkness. A tunnel that stops suddenly can reveal a plan abandoned because the rock changed. A rough chamber beside a polished one can suggest different phases of use. A shaft cut from above may meet a tunnel cut from below with slight misalignment, showing both ambition and limitation. These imperfections are not failures of the evidence. They are some of the most valuable evidence we have. Geology also influenced secrecy. A hidden refuge in soft rock could be expanded behind a house or under a courtyard with less visible disturbance than a massive surface fortification. A natural cave entrance could be disguised more easily than a new gate. A water tunnel could pass beneath the enemy lines or city walls if the landscape allowed it. But secrecy was never guaranteed. Spoil had to go somewhere. Air shafts could betray a buried space. Collapsed ground might expose a chamber. The underground could hide people, but it also left subtle traces for anyone who knew how to read the land. No single explanation fully accounts for why some regions developed vast subterranean systems while others did not, because need alone was not enough. Communities required the right geology, the right tools, the right pressures, and enough social organization to maintain what they created. A cave might be available but never become a city. A soft hillside might be carved for storage but not defense. A hard mountain might contain wealth enough to justify dangerous mines. The earth offered possibilities, culture selected among them. By the time ancient people began shaping the underground on a large scale, they were not entering a blank darkness. They were entering landscapes already made by volcanoes, seas, rivers, pressure, heat, and deep time. Every carved wall carried a geological memory older than any kingdom. Every chamber was both an artifact and a piece of earth history. This is one reason the underground world feels so different from surface ruins. A broken column speaks of a civilization. A carved tunnel speaks of a civilization meeting the planet itself, cutting into stone that had waited for millions of years before human fear, hunger, faith, or ambition gave it a new form. In central Anatolia, the land itself seems to remember fire. The plateau is wide, dry, and wind-shaped, but beneath its quiet surface lies the residue of ancient eruptions ash-turned to tuff, valleys carved into pale stone, cones and ridges softened by weather, until they look almost unreal in the low light. Cappadocia is famous today for its strange rock towers and cave churches, yet its most unsettling achievement is not fully visible from the air. It descends below villages and fields, through sloping passages and low corridors, into a network of rooms where people once prepared to vanish. The underground settlements of Cappadocia do not feel like caves simply occupied by chance. They feel planned, adapted, expanded, and reworked over time. Derinkuyu and Kaimakli are the best known, but they are not alone. Across the region, many underground complexes have been identified, some small and some astonishingly deep. Their exact origins remain debated because the spaces were used and reused across centuries, and underground architecture does not always offer easy dates. Some features may be very old, perhaps beginning as storage areas or refuges in earlier periods, while much of the surviving evidence points strongly to use during the Roman, Byzantine, and medieval eras, especially when local communities faced raids, instability, and religious pressure. The evidence remains incomplete, but the scale is difficult to dismiss. At Derinkuyu, the descent becomes a lesson in controlled disappearance. A visitor entering today follows lit passages and marked routes, but it's not hard to imagine the original experience a sudden turn away from the surface, a narrowing of air, the scrape of stone underfoot, the steady drop of temperature. Levels sink below levels. Rooms open from corridors and then close again into more corridors. There are stables near the upper areas, where animals could be brought down without forcing them too deep into the maze. There are storage chambers, kitchens blackened by smoke, spaces interpreted as wine or oil presses, wells, ventilation shafts, and rooms that may have served religious or communal purposes. Some estimates suggest that thousands of people could shelter in these complexes, though the exact numbers are uncertain and often exaggerated in popular accounts. What matters is not a dramatic figure, but the design itself. This was not a casual hiding place. It was a system built around survival. The most memorable features are the great rolling stone doors. These circular slabs, sometimes compared to millstones, could be moved across passageways to block entry. Their power lies in their simplicity. A narrow corridor approaches. A heavy disc waits to one side. When danger comes, the stone can be rolled into place from within, turning the passage into a sealed throat of rock. In many cases, the door is difficult or impossible to move effectively from the outside. A small central hole may have allowed defenders to see, breathe, or attack through the barrier, though scholars still debate the full range of functions. The message is clear enough: the underground world was designed with fear in mind. Not vague fear, but the practical expectation that someone might try to enter by force. Kaimakli offers a different rhythm. Its passages are lower and more winding, its rooms arranged in a way that feels less vertical than Derinkuyu, though still deeply complex. The settlement seems to spread through the rock like a burrowed city, with spaces for storage, cooking, ventilation, and shelter. The low ceilings force the body to bow. This physical compression changes the sense of place. A surface city invites people to look outward, toward streets, markets, sky, and neighbours. An underground refuge pulls attention inward. It reduces distance. It makes every sound important. A cough, a child's movement, the shift of an animal, the scrape of a doorstone. Everything would matter when silence above might mean safety or danger. One lesser-known detail is how much ordinary domestic life these spaces suggest, even if they were not always occupied permanently. The underground cities were not only defensive puzzles, they included practical features required for extended refuge food storage, ventilation, access to water, places for animals, and areas where people could process goods. A community hiding for a few hours needs little. A community hiding for days or weeks needs organization. Someone must manage grain. Someone must control lamps and smoke. Someone must know which passages are blocked, which shafts bring air, and how far sound carries. The underground city depends not only on architecture, but on social memory. People had to know how to disappear together. Cappadocia's geology made this possible. The tuff could be carved with relative ease, yet it held shape well enough for chambers and tunnels. Over time, people could expand existing rooms, connect spaces, deepen shafts, or seal old passages. The underground did not have to be completed in one grand phase. It could grow as danger changed, as families expanded, as villages inherited older spaces, and as new communities adapted what others had left behind. This layered history is part of the difficulty. When a chamber has been cut, reused, blackened by smoke, altered for worship, then abandoned and reopened centuries later, its first purpose can become hard to recover. No single explanation fully accounts for all of Cappadocia's subterranean landscape. The popular imagination often pushes these sites into extremes. Some claim they were built by lost civilizations with unknown technologies. Others imagine permanent cities where entire populations lived out their lives in darkness. The archaeological picture is more grounded and in its own way, more impressive. These were human-made systems carved with available tools, shaped by geology, and maintained because communities had reason to fear the surface. Their genius is not that they were impossible. Their genius is that they were possible, and that people made them work. To stand in such a place is to understand defense differently. A castle announces resistance. Walls rise. Towers watch. Gates confront the road. Cappadocia's underground cities resist by refusing visibility. They do not dominate the horizon. They remove people from it, in a landscape crossed by armies, raiders, and shifting powers. Invisibility could become a form of strength. The surface settlement might appear vulnerable, even empty, while beneath it a community waited in stone-cooled air, listening for the world above to change. Yet these spaces are not merely records of fear. They are records of adaptation. They show how people transformed a volcanic landscape into shelter, storage, ritual space, and memory. They remind us that ancient engineering was not always about height, weight, and spectacle. Sometimes it was about depth, concealment, and endurance. In Cappadocia, the Earth did not simply cover history after it was over. It became part of history while people were still living it, a second city below the first, ready whenever the surface grew too dangerous to trust. The underground refuge only makes sense when the surface is imagined at its worst. A village is not threatened in the abstract. It is threatened by hoofbeats on a road, by smoke rising from the next valley, by rumours carried ahead of soldiers, by the knowledge that a harvest can be burned in a single afternoon and a household scattered before nightfall. Ancient warfare often appears in history through kings, campaigns, inscriptions, and battlefield victories. But for most people its meaning was more immediate and less glorious. It meant hiding children, moving animals, concealing grain, abandoning visible rooms, and making the house look emptier than it was. In such moments, the underground did not need to be comfortable. It only needed to be harder to find than the people above. Homes hidden from armies were not always cities in the grand sense. Many were small, local, and improvised over generations, a chamber beneath a floor, a passage behind a storage room, a cave entrance masked by brush or stone, a narrow tunnel leading from one building to another, a deeper room where food and valuables could be sealed away. Their power came from modest details, an entrance placed where an outsider would not think to look, a stairway angled sharply enough to break the line of sight, a low corridor forcing an attacker to crouch, a blocking stone too heavy to shift without knowledge of its mechanism, a ventilation shaft disguised among rocks. These were not mysterious devices from a lost science. They were practical answers to the oldest problem of vulnerable settlements: how to survive when the enemy has the advantage of visibility. The design of defensive underground spaces often reveals a careful understanding of movement. Wide passages are useful for daily life, but dangerous in attack because they allow speed and numbers. Narrow passages slow the body. Low ceilings break confidence. Sharp turns prevent a rush. A person who knows the route can move in darkness with memory and touch, but a stranger must hesitate. That hesitation could matter. In a confined tunnel, one defender might delay several attackers. A doorstone could turn a corridor into a barrier. A hidden side passage could allow escape while pursuers waste time at a false end. No single explanation fully accounts for every subterranean defensive feature, but the repeated pattern is clear. Underground architecture could transform weakness into delay, and delay could become survival. In many places, the first defensive act was concealment rather than resistance. A fortified wall challenges an enemy. A hidden refuge hopes to be missed. This difference is crucial. Underground shelters were often built for communities that could not defeat an army in open battle, and could not afford monumental defences. Small farmers, religious minorities, frontier villages, and towns caught between rival powers might survive by becoming invisible for a short time. They did not need to hold the underground forever. They needed to wait out a raid, a passing force, a search party, or a moment of violence. The evidence remains incomplete because such events rarely left written records from the people hiding below. Yet the architecture itself suggests preparation shaped by experience. Communities do not carve deep refuges unless danger has visited often enough to make the labour worthwhile. The emotional discipline required must have been immense. A refuge is only successful if those inside remain quiet, organised, and patient. Lamps must be shielded, children must be calmed, animals must be controlled, smoke must be managed, food cannot be wasted, water must be rationed. A moment of panic could expose everyone. The underground world, in this sense, was not merely an engineering system, it was a social system under pressure. People had to trust one another. They had to know who entered first, who closed the door, who carried supplies, who guarded the passage, who understood the air shafts, and who decided when it was safe to return. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient defensive spaces depended on shared memory as much as stonework. There is a grim irony in the fact that invaders also used tunnels. The underground was not only the refuge of the weak, it was also a weapon of the strong. Siege warfare often brought attackers below the walls they could not break above ground. Sappers dug toward foundations, trying to undermine towers, collapse walls, or enter unseen. Defenders dug counter-tunnels, listening for the scrape of tools through earth and stone in some ancient sieges. The battle became a hidden struggle of sound and vibration, with men working in darkness beneath fortifications while armies waited above. The underground here was no sanctuary. It was a battlefield without sky, where bad air, fire, smoke, collapse, and sudden violence could kill as surely as arrows. This dual use makes the underground morally complicated. A tunnel could save a family or destroy a city wall. A hidden chamber could protect sacred objects or conceal stolen wealth. A passage could lead refugees to safety or soldiers into a sleeping town. Ancient people understood this ambiguity. The same earth that sheltered could betray. An air shaft could reveal a hiding place. A servant, prisoner, or frightened neighbour could expose an entrance. Smoke might rise from a concealed vent. Fresh spoil outside a settlement could hint at digging. Underground defence always balanced secrecy against necessity, and necessity always left traces. One lesser-known feature of some defensive refugees is how carefully they managed access from ordinary domestic spaces. The safest entrance was not always outside the settlement, where it could be watched, but inside a house, storage room, stable, or courtyard. The visible home became a mask for the invisible one. This arrangement changed the meaning of domestic architecture. A family's house might contain not only sleeping rooms and work areas, but a hidden threshold into communal survival. The boundary between private and collective space could vanish in danger. A passage under one home might connect to rooms used by many. A household floor could become the doorway through which neighbours disappeared. Such systems also shaped how communities thought about abandonment. To flee across open land is risky. To hide below is to remain attached to place, even while withdrawing from sight. The people in a refuge have not surrendered their settlement. They have folded themselves into it. They wait inside the land they know, beneath the houses, fields, and paths that define them. When danger passes, they can emerge to assess damage, recover animals, repair doors, uncover stores, and continue. This is a quieter kind of resilience than conquest or heroic defense, but it may have mattered far more often. The underground refuge is therefore one of the most human forms of ancient architecture. It admits fear without surrendering to it. It accepts that the surface can fail. It recognizes that survival may depend not on strength, but on patience, preparation, and the ability to disappear. In the long history of ancient civilizations, many cities announced themselves with walls and towers. Others endured because, when the world above became too dangerous, they already had another world waiting below. Fear could drive people below, but thirst kept them there. A hidden refuge might save a village for a night, yet no settlement, no fortress, no capital, and no sacred centre could endure without water moving reliably through its unseen body. It was quieter than a palace, but it determined whether people could remain in one place when rain failed, rivers shifted, or enemies closed in. Water is difficult to command because it is always moving somewhere. It seeps, evaporates, floods, stagnates, carries disease, cuts through soil, and finds weaknesses in stone. To build underground water systems, ancient engineers had to work with gravity rather than against it. They needed slopes gentle enough to guide flow without destroying the channel, reservoirs deep enough to store water without collapsing, and access points close enough for cleaning and repair. The evidence remains incomplete because water systems are repaired, reused, blocked, and rebuilt over centuries. Ancient people may not have described hydraulics in modern terms, but they understood water through observation, labour, and long experience. One of the most elegant underground solutions was the qanat, developed in ancient Iran and spread across parts of the Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa, and beyond. Qanats carried groundwater from higher ground through gently sloping underground tunnels to settlements and fields. From the surface, a qanat can appear as a line of small holes crossing a dry landscape, each one a vertical shaft used for construction, ventilation, and maintenance. Beneath them runs the channel, sometimes for many kilometres, hidden from sun and evaporation. The surprising beauty of the qanat is that it does not force water upward. It persuades water to travel sideways, using gravity so patiently that deserts could support gardens, villages, and cities. The labour behind such systems was immense. Workers had to dig shafts at intervals, remove debris, judge the underground slope with care, and avoid collapse in unstable ground. A mistake could ruin months of effort. Too shallow a tunnel might fail to reach water. Too steep a gradient might erode the channel. Too flat, and the water would not flow properly. Some qanats required maintenance across generations, making them not only engineering structures but social institutions, villages, rulers, or local specialists had to decide who cleaned them, who guarded access, who received water first, and how disputes were settled. In dry lands, underground water was never just a resource. It was law, power, survival, and memory moving through darkness. Cisterns answered a different problem. Instead of guiding groundwater from distant slopes, they stored water when it was available. Rainfall, spring flow, aqueduct supply, or runoff could be collected in underground chambers lined with plaster, stone, brick, or waterproof mortar. Some were modest domestic tanks. Others were vast urban reservoirs, cool and dark beneath streets or courtyards. Their stillness can be deceptive. A cistern is an act of planning against the future. It assumes that dry days will come, that siege may come, that the surface supply may fail, and that a city must have water waiting where the sun cannot steal it. In the Mediterranean world, cisterns and underground channels became essential to urban life. Cities collected rain from roofs, courtyards, and paved surfaces, guiding it below into storage. Fortresses carved tanks into bedrock so defenders could withstand siege. In some places, Huge underground reservoirs later took on an almost cathedral-like atmosphere, with rows of columns reflected in dark water, but their purpose was practical. A city without stored water was a city whose walls had an expiration date. Jerusalem offers one famous example of underground water as defense. The tunnel associated with Hezekiah, cut through bedrock to bring water from the Gihon spring toward the Pool of Siloam, is often connected with preparations against Assyrian threat in the late 8th century BCE. Its curving route has fascinated scholars because it does not follow the straightest possible line. Explanations vary geology, existing cracks, older channels, teams cutting from opposite ends, or attempts to remain within the city's protected area may all have played roles. What survives in the record suggests planning under pressure, but no single explanation fully accounts for every detail of the tunnel's path. Its importance is clear enough: water outside a wall could become a weakness, and water brought inside could become survival. Drainage was the less glamorous sibling of water supply, but no less important. Cities that could not remove wastewater, storm runoff, and floodwater paid the price in disease, mud, damaged foundations, and blocked streets. The famous drains and sewers of ancient cities remind us that subterranean engineering was not only about obtaining precious water, but about controlling dangerous water. A rainstorm could become a disaster if streets became rivers and houses collapsed into softened ground. Underground drains turned chaos into direction. These systems show ancient cities as living bodies. Wells are mouths, channels are veins, cisterns are stomachs, drains are hidden organs that must function, or the whole surface begins to fail. People walking through a marketplace may never think about the tunnel below their feet, but their lives depend on it. The living need water constantly, which is perhaps why water systems are so easily overlooked until they break. Underground water also shaped belief. Springs emerging from caves or rock fissures often gathered sacred meaning because they seemed to rise from the earth's hidden interior. A source of water in a dry landscape could feel like a gift from powers older than the settlement itself. Scholars still debate how to separate practical use from sacred meaning, because ancient people often made no sharp division between the two. A spring could be useful and holy. A well could be infrastructure and memory. A tunnel could be engineering and protection under divine care. The world beneath ancient civilizations was therefore not only a place to hide from enemies, it was the place where cities drank, endured dry seasons, survived sieges, and managed the unruly force that made settlement possible in the first place. The surface world may have displayed power in stone walls and public squares, but below, water moved without applause. It slipped through channels, waited in cisterns, rose in wells, and passed through tunnels cut by hands that understood one quiet truth. Civilization is never more fragile than when its water disappears. If water explains how ancient cities kept living, burial explains how they remembered. Beneath many settlements, beside them, or just beyond their walls, another population gathered in silence. The dead were placed under floors, inside shafts, behind sealed stones, within painted chambers, along catacomb corridors, and across whole underground necropolises where the city of the living seemed to continue in a darker form. To descend into these places is to enter a civilization's most careful argument against disappearance. Bodies decay, dynasties fall, houses are rebuilt, languages change, but a tomb says that someone once mattered enough to be protected from the open world. Burial is one of the oldest ways humans altered the earth with intention. A grave may be simple, but it is never meaningless. It separates the dead from scavengers, weather, and ordinary movement. It also fixes memory in place. In many ancient societies, the underground gave the dead a kind of stability that the surface could not offer. A body laid beneath earth or stone entered a protected zone, neither fully present nor fully gone. What survives in the record suggests that burial often carried several meanings at once: grief, hygiene, family identity, social rank, fear of the dead, hope for an afterlife, and the need to bind a community to its past. Some of the most intimate underground burials were beneath houses, in parts of the ancient Near East and elsewhere. People sometimes buried infants, children, or relatives under floors or within domestic spaces. The practice varied widely, and scholars still debate its meanings in different contexts. It may have expressed belonging, ancestor connection, protection, or simply the practical use of familiar ground. Yet the effect is powerful. The house was not only a shelter for the living, it could also contain the dead as part of its foundation. Every meal, birth, repair, an ordinary day unfolded above remembered bodies. The underground was not distant, it was directly underfoot. Other societies created separate landscapes for the dead. Tombs gathered beyond city walls, along roads, in cliffs, deserts, hillsides, and valleys. These necropolises were not random dumping grounds. They were organized statements about identity and status. A simple pit grave might hold one person with a few objects. A chamber tomb could receive generations of a family. A royal burial might require corridors, sealed rooms, offerings, paintings, inscriptions, and elaborate protections. The deeper and more controlled the burial space, the more it could suggest wealth, authority, and access to labor. The underground became a place where inequality could be preserved with extraordinary care. Egypt made this logic famous, though it was never alone in doing so. Above ground, pyramids and mortuary temples commanded the desert edge, but beneath and within them lay chambers designed to protect the dead and equip them for eternity. Later royal tombs cut into the Valley of the Kings moved the emphasis from visible monument to hidden chamber, as if secrecy itself might defend the body and its treasures. The irony is familiar. Many hidden tombs were robbed despite their concealment, but the effort reveals a central belief. The dead king required a protected underground journey, a space where ritual, wealth, text, and architecture could work together against decay. No single explanation fully accounts for every feature of Egyptian funerary architecture, but the desire to preserve both body and identity runs through it like a buried thread. In the Mediterranean world, underground burial took many forms. The catacombs of Rome, used especially by Jewish and Christian communities, are among the most evocative. They are not the secret meeting places of popular imagination in the simple sense often repeated. Their main function was burial. Long galleries cut through soft volcanic rock held niches for bodies, family chambers, inscriptions, symbols, and painted scenes. They formed dense underground cemeteries beneath the outskirts of the city. One lesser-known detail is how practical their layout could be. Graves were often cut in stacked rows along corridors, using space efficiently in land where burial ground near the city was valuable. The result feels haunting today, but it was also an organized solution to the problem of placing the dead near memory, ritual, and community. Catacombs remind us that underground burial was not only about hiding, it was about access. Families and mourners needed to return. Lamps had to be carried, passages had to be known, tombs had to be marked enough for the living, but protected enough for the dead. This balance created a strange architecture of controlled visitation. The dead were removed from daily life, yet not abandoned. The living entered the underground to perform rites, leave offerings, remember names. and maintain bonds that death had changed but not completely severed. In other places, tombs were carved into cliffs and hillsides with entrances facing the living world like dark doors. In Petra, Lycia, Etruria, and many other regions, rock-cut tombs turned natural stone into facades, chambers, benches, niches, and symbolic houses for the dead. Some imitate surface architecture, as if the dead required their own version of homes, temples, or palaces. This imitation is deeply revealing. The underground was not imagined as empty nothingness. It could be furnished with the forms of life. Even when bodies were placed in darkness, architecture carried the memory of rooms, thresholds, status, and belonging. Yet tombs are difficult evidence because they are often disturbed. Grave robbers entered many of them long before archaeologists did. Later communities reused burial chambers, cleared bones, added new bodies, painted over walls, or quarried stone. Organic materials decay. Inscriptions may be absent. Objects can be moved far from their original position. The evidence remains incomplete, and interpretation must be careful. A weapon in a grave does not always mean the person was a warrior. Jewelry does not always reveal rank in a simple way. A child buried with rich goods may speak more about family identity than personal achievement. Underground burial preserves, but it also confuses. Still, the dead beneath cities offer something the surface rarely gives so directly: the human scale of civilization. Palaces tell us what rulers ordered. Tombs tell us what people feared losing. A comb, a bead, a ceramic cup, a tool, a painted hand, a folded body, a repaired coffin, a reused chamber. These details bring ancient societies closer than triumphal inscriptions ever can. They show care, anxiety, ritual labor, and the stubborn refusal to let a life vanish without trace. The underground world of the dead also shaped the living city above it. Roads passed tombs, houses stood near ancestors, festivals brought movement toward burial grounds, laws regulated where bodies could be placed, religious beliefs grew around descent, return, judgment, rebirth, and the unseen realm below. Even when the dead were outside the walls, they remained part of the city's mental map. The living knew where they were. So beneath ancient civilizations, death did not simply end life. It created architecture, ritual, memory, and territory. The underground became a vast archive of human attachment, built not for sunlight, but for endurance. And in the quiet chambers where names fade, bones settle, and offerings crumble, one truth remains sharply visible: civilizations do not only reveal themselves by how they build for the living, they reveal themselves by how carefully they make room for the dead. The same darkness that protected the dead also drew the living toward places they could not fully explain. Caves, shafts, springs, fissures, and chambers beneath the earth often became more than shelters or tombs. They became thresholds. A person standing at the mouth of a cave faces a visible boundary between worlds behind them: daylight, weather, fields, animals, and the known paths of daily life. Before them, a space where sound changes, temperature drops, and the eye loses confidence. Ancient people did not need to be naive to feel the power of such places. The underground alters the body before it alters belief. Breath becomes louder. Footsteps return strangely. A flame seems smaller than it should. The earth no longer feels like a surface to walk on, but like a vast interior that has opened just enough to let humans enter. This is why caves appear again and again in the sacred landscapes of ancient civilizations and prehistoric communities. Some were used for offerings, burials, paintings, initiation, pilgrimage, healing, or contact with ancestors and gods. Others may have been visited only rarely, perhaps by specialists, perhaps by small groups, perhaps in moments of crisis. Scholars still debate the exact meanings of many ritual cave sites because the evidence remains incomplete. Objects may survive without the songs, gestures, myths, and fears that gave them meaning. A broken pot in a cave might be rubbish, offering, ritual destruction, or the remains of a meal. A painted animal might represent hunting magic, memory, vision, teaching, or something modern categories do not easily hold. Yet the repeated use of deep, dark places suggests that descent itself mattered. In prehistoric Europe, painted caves reveal how ancient humans entered darkness with intention. Places such as Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, and many others contain animals, signs, hand stencils, and traces of movement far from daylight. These were not casual doodles on convenient walls. Some images appear deep inside cave systems, in chambers that required lamps, planning, and knowledge of the route. The surfaces were chosen with care. Natural bulges in the rock could become the shoulder of a bison, the curve of a horse, the movement of a lion. The cave wall was not a blank canvas. It was a living surface in the imagination of the people who used it. What survives in the record suggests a complex relationship between art, landscape, animal life, and symbolic thought, though no single explanation fully accounts for the power of these places. One lesser-known detail is how much sound may have mattered underground. Some researchers have noticed that images and signs in certain caves appear in places with unusual acoustic qualities, where echoes are strong or where sound behaves unexpectedly. This does not prove a single theory, but it reminds us that ancient cave experience was not only visual. A painted chamber lit by flickering fat lamps would have been full of movement shadows breathing over animal forms, voices changing shape, footsteps fading into unseen passages, smoke touching the ceiling. In such a setting, the underground could feel animated. The boundary between natural rock and human image may have seemed less fixed than it does in a museum photograph. In Mesoamerica, caves and openings in the earth often carried associations with origin, rain, fertility, and the underworld. Among Maya communities, caves could be linked to sacred geography, ancestors, and powerful beings connected with water and the earth's interior. Archaeologists have found offerings, ceramics, modified passages, and evidence of ritual activity in many cave systems. Some caves contain pools or streams, deepening their connection to life-giving water. In a landscape where rain could determine survival, a dark opening into the earth was not merely a hole. It could be understood as a mouth of the living world, a place where humans approached forces that shaped crops, storms, and lineage. This sacred geography was not abstract. It affected how people moved through their landscapes. A cave near a settlement might be part of its identity. A mountain with chambers inside it could become a place of pilgrimage or political meaning. Rulers could draw legitimacy from association with sacred caves, mountains, and underworld symbolism. The underground was not opposed to power on the surface. It could strengthen it. A king who claimed connection to ancestors, gods, or origin places rooted his authority in something older and deeper than ordinary politics. The earth below became part of the architecture of rule. In the ancient Mediterranean, too, descent could carry sacred force, oracles, mystery cults, chthonic deities, and underworld myths often gathered around caves, fissures, springs, and places where vapors or unusual geology marked the landscape. Not every famous story can be matched neatly with a physical underground chamber, and popular accounts often exaggerate the mystery. Still, the pattern is meaningful. The Greeks and Romans, like many peoples, imagined certain divine powers as belonging below the dead: the earth, fertility, wealth, prophecy, and hidden knowledge. A sanctuary connected with a cave or cleft could feel like a point of contact with these powers. The descent was not only movement through space, it was movement toward what ordinary daylight concealed. The underground also shaped initiation. In several cultures, dark enclosed spaces appear to have been used for rites of passage, although details are often uncertain. A person entering such a place might be separated from ordinary society, deprived of familiar sight, and returned transformed. Darkness is useful in ritual because it strips away the normal world. It creates suspense, vulnerability, and dependence on guides. It makes time feel different. The initiate who descends and returns has enacted in bodily form a passage through danger, death, secrecy, or rebirth. The evidence for specific rites varies greatly, and scholars must be cautious, but the symbolic logic of descent is widespread. Caves also carried danger. Sacred does not mean peaceful. Ancient people knew that underground places could kill. Loose rock, sudden drops, bad air, flooding, wild animals, and disorientation all made caves risky. This danger may have intensified their power. A place that is difficult to enter, difficult to navigate, and difficult to survive can become socially restricted. Not everyone goes there. Those who do may be specialists, elders, priests, shamans, mourners, rulers, or the desperate. The underground's physical danger helps create its spiritual weight. What makes sacred caves different from tombs or refuges is that they often preserve intention without explanation. Offerings are left, images are made, passages are modified, but the full story stays out of reach. The cave accepts evidence and withholds certainty. Modern archaeology can study pigments, bones, residues, dates, tool marks, and spatial patterns. It can reconstruct movement and compare sites. Yet the inner experience of the people who descended, the fear, awe, memory, music, expectation, and belief can only be approached indirectly. The darkness that preserved their traces also swallowed their meanings. Still, one thing is clear. Ancient civilizations did not see the underground as empty absence. They saw it as presence. It could hold the dead, feed springs, hide dangers, store wealth, and open paths toward powers beyond the ordinary world. The cave was a wound in the surface, but also a doorway, and for people who lived close to weather, animals, stone, hunger, and death, such a doorway could not be ignored. To enter it was to step into the deep imagination of the earth itself, where sacred caves drew people downward in search of meaning. Minds pulled them down for something more dangerous and more material. Beneath ancient civilizations lay the substances that made power visible on the surface: copper for tools and weapons, tin for bronze, iron for stronger blades and plows, gold for rulers and temples, silver for coinage, salt for preservation, pigments for painting, stone for monuments, and precious minerals for trade across astonishing distances. The shining objects displayed in palaces and tombs often began in places where the light was poor, the air was foul, and the labour was punishing. The underground world was not only refuge, tomb, or sacred threshold. It was also a workplace, and in many cases, one of the harshest workplaces humans ever created. Mining changed the relationship between people and the earth. A farmer cuts into soil and expects renewal. A miner cuts into rock and removes something that will not return. Every tunnel is an act of extraction, a decision that hidden matter is valuable enough to justify darkness, danger, and pain. Ancient miners followed veins through mountains, opened shafts into desert hills, widened natural cracks, and broke stone by fire, hammer, and wedge. They crawled through passages too narrow for comfort, carried baskets of ore toward the surface, and worked by the weak light of lamps that consumed oxygen as surely as human lungs did. What survives in the record suggests both remarkable skill and severe human cost. Copper was among the metals that drew early communities underground. Before bronze transformed tools and warfare, people had to find copper ores, recognize their value, extract them, crush them, and smelt them at high temperatures. This required knowledge that was practical, experimental, and often inherited through specialists in places such as the Balkans, the Near East, Cyprus, Sinai, and parts of Europe. Ancient mining left shafts, galleries, hammerstones, smelting debris, and traces of organized labor. The evidence remains incomplete, because mines were often reused for centuries and later mining could erase earlier work. Yet the pattern is clear: metal did not simply appear in civilization. It was wrestled from the underground through repeated, dangerous effort. Gold carried a different kind of force. It was not always useful in the way copper or iron was useful, but it was powerful because it endured, shone, and resisted decay. Ancient Egypt's wealth was deeply tied to gold from the eastern desert and Nubia, where mining expeditions worked in harsh landscapes far from the comfort of the Nile Valley. Gold could become jewelry, royal regalia, temple offerings, funerary equipment, and diplomatic gifts on the surface. It signaled divine kingship and eternal splendor. Underground and in desert mining camps, it meant heat, dust, broken stone, guarded routes, and labor directed by state power. The beauty of gold objects can make their origin seem almost weightless, but every polished surface hides a chain of extraction. Salt was less glamorous, but in many ways more essential. Before modern refrigeration, salt preserved food, supported trade, and sustained armies and cities. Salt mines and salt springs became strategic resources. In some ancient communities, salt could shape routes, wealth, taxation, and settlement patterns. Mining salt underground was dangerous because salt can deform, dissolve, and create unstable spaces, yet its value made the risk worthwhile. A lesser-known detail is that salt mines can preserve organic materials unusually well, including tools, textiles, and even human remains in some regions. In such places, the underground does not merely yield wealth, it preserves the bodies and belongings of those who labored for it with startling intimacy. The underground economy also depended on stone. Temples, statues, sarcophagi, city walls, columns, and monuments began in quarries, many of which functioned like open wounds in the landscape, while others pushed into hillsides and cliffs. Quarry workers read the grain of stone, cut channels, inserted wedges, and separated blocks that might weigh many tons. In Egypt, Greece, Rome, and many other regions, the movement from quarry to monument was an enormous logistical achievement. A column standing in sunlight may look like pure architecture, but it is also the end of a hidden story of extraction, transport, measurement, and labor. Mines were places where technology and suffering met. Fire setting could crack hard rock, but filled confined spaces with heat and smoke. Deeper shafts demanded ventilation, drainage, and supports. Water seepage could halt work or drown miners, Bad air could kill without warning. Roof collapse was a constant threat. Lamps had to be supplied with fuel, tools broke, or had to be sorted, crushed, washed, carried, and smelted. No single explanation fully accounts for how every ancient mining operation was organized, because conditions varied widely. Some mining may have been seasonal or local, some was controlled by states, temples, elites, or military authorities. Some used enslaved people, prisoners, debt labourers, or highly skilled specialists. The underground did not treat them equally, but it endangered them all. The social consequences were enormous. Metal wealth could strengthen kingdoms, arm soldiers, expand trade, support taxation, and create new hierarchies. A ruler who controlled mines controlled not only material, but possibility. Bronze weapons required copper and tin, often from different regions, which meant mining connected distant landscapes into networks of exchange and dependency. Silver could support coinage and imperial finance. Iron tools could change agriculture and warfare. Precious stones and pigments could travel far from their source, appearing in graves and temples as signs of status and connection. Beneath the surface, extraction fed the ambitions of the surface world. Yet mines also scarred environments. Smelting required fuel, often charcoal, which could intensify pressure on forests. Waste rock accumulated. Toxic residues could contaminate soil and water. Ancient industry was smaller than modern industry, but not harmless. The idea that ancient civilizations lived lightly on the earth is too simple. Many understood their landscapes deeply, but they also exploited them intensely when power, survival, or wealth demanded it. The evidence for environmental damage varies by region, yet mining and metallurgy clearly altered both human societies and the lands around them. There is a moral darkness in these places that differs from the sacred darkness of caves or the protective darkness of refuges. Mines reveal civilization's appetite. They show what people were willing to endure and what elites were willing to demand for the materials that made cities, armies, temples, and tombs possible. The underground wealth of the ancient world did not rise by magic into royal hands. It came through narrow passages, aching bodies, broken rock, and air heavy with dust. And still, the story's not only one of exploitation, it is also one of knowledge. Ancient miners were expert observers of colour, texture, fracture, weight, and fire. They knew how to follow a vein, how to test stone, how to keep a passage usable, how to transform dull ore into shining metal. Their work joined geology to chemistry long before either existed as formal sciences. In the hidden labour of mines, civilization learned to change the earth into tools, ornaments, money, weapons, and monuments. The surface world glittered because the underground had been opened, and because countless people entered darkness so that others could build in the light. Once rulers understood the underground as a source of wealth, they also learned to use it as a tool of control. Mines fed power from below, but tunnels, drains, passages, foundations, and hidden works allowed states to organize cities, defend borders, break enemies, and display authority in ways that were not always visible from the street. Empire is usually imagined in broad roads, marching armies, stone gates, and monuments raised into the sun. Yet many empires also depended on buried systems that kept their surface order functioning. A capital could look magnificent above ground while beneath it workers maintained drains, water channels, culverts, storage vaults, sewers, escape passages, and structural foundations that made the visible city possible. Subterranean engineering gave large states a quiet advantage, It turned the ground itself into infrastructure. A village might dig a storage pit or refuge by local memory, but an empire could mobilize surveyors, labor gangs, soldiers, enslaved workers, engineers, tax resources, and long-term maintenance. It could cut tunnels through hills for roads or aqueducts, build drains beneath paved streets, carry water across difficult terrain, and carve hidden approaches during sieges. These works did not always look dramatic to the people who used them, but they created a deeper form of authority. Power became something that moved underfoot, unseen but constant. Rome offers one of the clearest examples, not because it invented every technique, but because it expanded underground infrastructure to an extraordinary scale. Roman cities were not only forums, baths, amphitheatres, and temples, they were also drains, sewers, aqueduct channels, service tunnels, and foundations. The famous Cloaca Maxima in Rome began as part of a drainage system that helped control marshy low ground, and later became a major sewer. Its history is complex, repaired and modified over centuries, but its symbolic importance is striking. Before a city can become imperial, it must first deal with mud, waste, and floodwater. The grandeur of marble depends on the less glamorous ability to keep streets from drowning in filth. This hidden labour shaped public life. Baths needed water, fountains needed water, latrines needed drainage, streets needed runoff channels. Amphitheatres and monumental buildings needed foundations that could survive crowding, weather, and time. What survives in the records suggests that Roman engineers, like many ancient engineers before and after them, understood that urban spectacle rested on buried systems. Citizens might admire the arch of an aqueduct crossing a valley, but much of that water's journey could happen underground, protected from contamination, temperature changes, or enemy damage. The empire's visible mastery of water was tied to invisible channels, gradients, settling tanks, and maintenance shafts. Persian imperial engineering showed another kind of buried control through roads, water, and administrative reach across arid landscapes. Qanats and underground channels allowed settlement, agriculture, and military movement in regions where surface water was unreliable. Although qanats were not only imperial creations, states could support, protect, tax, and expand such systems. The ruler who ensured water could also claim legitimacy. In dry lands, authority was not merely proclaimed. It flowed. A canal, a tunnel, or a protected well could bind communities to larger systems of power more effectively than a distant palace. Tunnels also mattered in war. Siegecraft pushed empires and kingdoms beneath walls when surface assault failed. Attackers dug mines toward foundations, packed tunnels with timber, set fires, and tried to collapse sections of fortification. Defenders listened for digging, lowered shields into wells to detect vibrations, or cut countermines to intercept the attackers underground. In some cases, the struggle beneath a city wall became as decisive as the battle outside it. Scholars still debate the details of many ancient siege tunnels because collapsed passages, later repairs, and incomplete accounts leave uncertainty. Yet the broad pattern is clear. The underground could become a weapon of patience. At Dura Europos, on the Euphrates, the underground preserves one of the more chilling pieces of siege evidence from antiquity. During a 3rd century conflict, attackers and defenders appear to have fought through tunnels beneath the city's walls. Archaeological remains suggest that chemical smoke or toxic fumes may have been used in the confined passages, killing defenders in the darkness. The exact reconstruction is debated, but the scene is haunting because it shows subterranean warfare stripped of romance. There is no open battlefield, no heroic line under the sun, only men in tunnels, bad air, panic, and death below a wall that both sides are trying to control. Large states also used underground spaces for secrecy and security. Palaces, fortresses, and citadels could include hidden passages, posterns, storerooms, and protected water access. Some were practical escape routes. Others allowed communication or movement during siege. Many stories of secret royal tunnels are exaggerated or invented later, because hidden passages attract legend almost automatically. Still, real examples exist where rulers and defenders understood the value of concealed movement. A gate can be watched, a road can be blocked, a tunnel, if it remains unknown, changes the balance between trap and escape. There is a lesser-known political dimension to drainage and sanitation. To build and maintain underground systems is to organize labor beyond the household scale. Someone must command workers, collect materials, enforce access, fund repairs, and decide which neighborhoods receive protection from flood or waste. The underground city therefore reflects social hierarchy. Elite districts might receive better drains or cisterns. Sacred and administrative centers might be prioritized. Poorer areas might live with stagnant water, unstable ground, or failing channels. The buried system beneath a city can reveal inequality as clearly as the houses above it. Subterranean control could also extend into ritual authority. Temples sometimes manage storage rooms, treasuries, sacred wells, crypts, and restricted chambers. The ability to control what was hidden could strengthen religious power. A treasury below a temple was not simply a secure room. It was a statement that wealth belonged under divine protection. A crypt beneath a sanctuary could make the building feel rooted in sacred depth. The underground gave institutions a way to separate ordinary people from guarded objects, restricted knowledge, or ancestral remains. Power often depends not only on what is displayed, but on what is withheld. No single explanation fully accounts for the underground works of ancient states, because they were so varied, practical, military, sacred, administrative, and symbolic at once. But taken together, they show that empire was not only an expansion across maps, it was an expansion into depth. Rulers did not merely command land, they reorganized the layers beneath it. They buried water, waste, wealth, movement, and sometimes violence under the feet of their subjects. The result is a different image of ancient power, not just a throne above a crowd, but a city breathing through vents, draining through channels, guarded by hidden passages, supplied by tunnels, financed by mines, and defended from below as well as above. The surface gave empire its face, the underground gave it endurance, and when the monuments cracked, when capitals changed hands, when inscriptions were broken or reused, those buried systems often remained, carrying water, holding shadows, or waiting in silence for later generations to discover how much of civilization had been built where no sunlight reached. Across the ocean from the old imperial tunnels of Eurasia, the underground took different forms, shaped by different landscapes, different histories, and different ways of imagining the Earth. The Americas did not contain one hidden subterranean civilization waiting beneath the continents. Despite the legends and modern claims that often gather around ancient ruins, what they did contain was far more varied and far more interesting caves treated as sacred openings. Temple tunnels used for ritual power, stone galleries designed to transform sound and movement, earth-covered ceremonial chambers, cliff shelters, storage pits, and buried architecture folded into the political and religious life of complex societies. The evidence does not point to a single lost network. It points to many local ways of going below. In Mesoamerica, the underground was often tied to origins, water, fertility, and the underworld. Among Maya communities, caves and cenotes could be understood as entrances into sacred geography, places where the earth opened and where humans could approach forces connected to rain, ancestors, death, and renewal. This was not a vague poetic idea floating above daily life. It was rooted in landscape. In parts of the Yucatan, rivers often disappear from the surface and move through limestone below. Cenotes, the natural sinkholes that reveal groundwater, were not merely useful sources of water. They are dramatic openings into a hidden system that made life possible in a region where surface rivers are limited. To stand at the edge of such a pool is to see water, darkness, reflection, and depth gathered in one place. It is not difficult to understand why people gave these openings sacred meaning. Archaeology has found offerings, ceramics, human remains, and ritual traces in some cenotes and caves, although interpretation must always be careful. Objects can fall, be washed, be deposited over long periods, or be placed intentionally for reasons that are not fully recoverable. At Chichen Itza, the sacred cenote became famous for deposits of precious objects and human bones, long linked to ritual offerings. Popular retellings often simplify this into spectacle, but the deeper point is that water-filled openings into the earth formed part of a sacred and political landscape. Rulers and ritual specialists could draw authority from contact with places believed to connect the human world to deeper powers. What survives in the record suggests that caves and cenotes were not marginal spaces. They could stand near the center of how communities understood rain, lineage, and cosmic order. Deep cave sites in the Maya world reinforce this connection. In caves such as those in Belize and Guatemala, archaeologists have documented ceramics, modified spaces, hearths, platforms, and human remains. Some vessels were deliberately broken, a pattern often interpreted as ritual termination, though scholars still debate the meaning in each case. One striking detail is that many offerings were carried into difficult, dark, wet, and dangerous passages. This required effort beyond simple convenience. People entered the cave not because it was easy, but because the difficulty may have mattered. The descent separated ordinary life from ritual action. Darkness, water, echo, and stone turned movement itself into part of the ceremony. At Teotihuacan, in central Mexico, the underground appears in another form, not only natural cave or water opening, but planned symbolic architecture beneath monumental buildings. The tunnel discovered beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent has drawn attention because of its controlled access, chambers, offerings, and possible cosmological meaning. The exact interpretation remains debated, but the arrangement suggests that rulers or ritual authorities use subterranean space to stage ideas about creation, sacred mountains, water, and power. In Mesoamerican thought, caves and mountains were often closely linked. A pyramid could imitate a sacred mountain, and a tunnel beneath it could evoke an entrance into the Earth's interior. The city above and the hidden chamber below were not separate. They worked together as a constructed universe. Farther south, in the Andes, underground architecture followed different principles. At Chavín de Huántar, in the highlands of Peru, stone galleries wind through a major ceremonial center that flourished long before the Inca. These passages are not vast cities for everyday living. They are controlled, disorienting, and deeply atmospheric spaces within a ritual complex. Narrow corridors, internal chambers, drainage channels, and carefully placed stonework shaped movement and perception. The Lanzón, a carved stone figure at the heart of the old temple, stands in a gallery where access was restricted and experience was likely carefully managed. Sound may have played a role, water moving through channels, voices echoing in stone corridors, and the controlled emergence of ritual specialists could have created powerful effects. No single explanation fully accounts for Chavin's underground galleries, but they clearly show how architecture could turn dissent, darkness, and sound into authority. The Andes also generated later legends of hidden tunnels, especially around Inca sites such as Cusco and Sacsayhuaman. Stories of secret passages linking temples, fortresses, and distant places have circulated for centuries. Some may preserve memories of real underground chambers, drainage works, storage spaces, or restricted passages. Others belong more to colonial imagination, treasure hunting, and modern speculation. The important distinction is that the Inca and earlier Andean societies certainly built sophisticated stone architecture, roads, storehouses, ritual spaces, and water systems, but claims of vast unexplored tunnel networks connecting whole regions require evidence that has not been demonstrated. The legend is powerful, but legend is not a map. In North America, the underground appears less as hidden cities and more as earth-integrated architecture. Many indigenous societies built with earth, timber, stone, and landscape in ways that do not fit the old-world image of tunnels beneath stone cities. Earth lodges, pit houses, semi-subterranean structures, storage pits, and ceremonial chambers offered insulation, protection, and social meaning in the American Southwest. Caivas became important ceremonial spaces among ancestral Pueblo communities and their descendants. These circular or rectangular rooms, often partly or wholly below ground, were not simply basements. They were places of gathering, ritual, memory, and community identity. Their descent mattered. Entering a kiva meant moving from the open surface into a defined, sacred and social interior, often associated with the emergence traditions and the layered relationship between people and the earth. Mounds and earthworks also complicate the meaning of underground space. At sites associated with Adena, Hopewell, Mississippian, and other traditions, earth was shaped into platforms, burial mounds, geometric enclosures, and ceremonial landscapes. These were not underground cities, but they were architectures of earth, memory, and cosmology. Burials within mounds could place the dead inside constructed landforms, turning soil into monument. The surface form and the buried chamber work together. In some cases, later myths and fringe theories have tried to detach these works from the indigenous peoples who built them, inventing lost races or foreign visitors to explain achievements that archaeology firmly places within native histories. Such claims are unsupported and have often served to erase the real builders. The evidence points instead to complex, regionally diverse societies with their own engineering, ritual, trade, and political traditions. The hidden underground world of the Americas therefore resists one simple category. It includes natural caves made sacred, cenotes filled with offerings, tunnels beneath pyramids, Andean galleries of stone and sound, earth lodges warmed by soil, kivas entered through descent, and mounds that held the dead within shaped land. It is not the story of a single buried empire. It is the story of many civilizations discovering that the earth below could hold water, ancestors, power, ritual, shelter, an origin itself. And once again, the pattern is familiar. The underground is never empty. It becomes whatever a culture most needs to protect, approach, remember, or fear. Wherever people entered the earth, stories followed them. A cave was never only a cave for long, a shaft descending into blackness, a spring rising from stone, a tomb sealed behind slabs, a mine swallowing workers into the mountain, a tunnel vanishing beneath a temple. Each of these places seemed to confirm that the world had hidden layers. Ancient myths did not need to invent the underground from nothing. The earth itself supplied the image. It opened in cliffs, cracked under earthquakes, breathed cold air from limestone chambers, swallowed rivers, released vapours, preserved bones, and returned metals from darkness. Human imagination took these physical experiences and gave them names: underworlds, ancestor realms, wombs of creation, kingdoms of the dead, homes of gods, prisons of monsters, and hidden cities where time moved differently. The underworld is one of the most persistent ideas in human storytelling because burial makes it unavoidable. The dead go down. Even when a society cremates bodies, places ashes in urns, exposes the dead, or builds tombs above ground, the association between death and depth remains powerful. To place a body beneath soil is to create a visible metaphor the person has left the surface world. Over generations, that act becomes cosmology. The grave becomes a doorway. The tomb becomes a house. The ancestors become a presence below, not simply gone, but relocated. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient peoples imagine the dead as existing in a realm connected to darkness, earth, and distance. Though the details differed enormously from culture to culture. In Mesopotamia, the land of the dead was often imagined as a shadowy place below, a realm of dust and diminished existence. It was not always a comforting vision. The great cities of Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, and Assyria rose between rivers, but their myths knew that beneath human order lay another order, older and less generous, the descent of deities into the underworld, the fear of ghosts, and the importance of proper burial all reflect a world in which the boundary between living and dead required care. This was not abstract theology separated from daily life. A neglected dead person might become restless. A family tomb, offering, or ritual action helped maintain balance between surface households and the unseen below. Scholars still debate the full meanings of these beliefs across time, because texts, rituals, and archaeological evidence do not always align neatly. But the direction of imagination is clear. Below the city lay a realm that demanded respect. In Egypt, the underworld took on a more elaborate and hopeful form, though it was still dangerous. The tomb was not merely storage for a corpse, it was a prepared landscape for transformation. Passages, paintings, texts, offerings, and chambers equipped the dead for a journey through a night world of gates, guardians, judgment, and renewal. The sun itself was imagined as travelling through the hidden realm before returning to the horizon. This image may feel cosmic, but it's grounded in everyday observation. The sun disappears beneath the western horizon and emerges again in the east. The movement of light becomes a myth of descent and return. The underground tomb, placed in desert cliffs or beneath monumental forms, becomes part of that great cycle. No single explanation fully accounts for all Egyptian funerary thought, but the connection between darkness, danger, preservation, and rebirth is unmistakable. Greek myths also placed powerful meaning below the surface. Hades was not simply a place of punishment, as later retellings often imply, but the broad realm of the dead, ruled by its own laws. The living reached it through caves, river mouths, deep chasms, and far-off entrances at the edges of the known world. Stories of heroes descending into the underworld reflect more than fantasy. They dramatize the human desire to cross the one boundary that ordinary life cannot cross and return with knowledge. Orpheus, Heracles, Odysseus, and other figures enter darkness in different ways. But the pattern remains descent tests the living, because the underground belongs to forces that cannot be conquered by ordinary strength. Real landscapes helped anchor these myths, caves associated with oracles, fissures where vapors emerged, volcanic regions, deep lakes, and river caves could all become places where the lower world felt near. In the Mediterranean, as elsewhere, geology and storytelling reinforced one another. A place with strange air, echoing chambers, sudden cold, or dangerous openings did not have to be invented as sacred. It already felt unlike ordinary ground. Myth gave that feeling structure. In Mesoamerica, underworld imagery was not merely a place for the dead, but also a realm of origin, water, fertility, and transformation. Maya caves and cenotes show how the Earth's interior could be tied to both death and life. Darkness below could hold bones, but also water. It could receive offerings, but also release rain in the imagination of ritual geography. This double meaning is important. The underground is not only an ending, it can be a source. Seeds go into soil and return as plants. Springs rise from hidden places. Ancestors lie below and yet remain part of living identity. The same depth that frightens also nourishes. In the Andes, mountains could contain ancestors, powers, and sacred interiors. Caves, springs, and rock formations were woven into local memory and ritual landscapes. Later Inca and colonial stories of hidden passages, sleeping rulers, buried treasure, and secret roads beneath sacred cities grew from a world where the earth was already alive with meaning. Some stories may echo real restricted spaces, tombs, storage chambers, or sacred caves. Others became exaggerated through conquest. Treasure hunting and the imagination of outsiders. The evidence remains incomplete, and many claims of vast hidden tunnel systems are unsupported. But the myths themselves reveal something real. People believed power could withdraw into the earth and remain there. Mines also created myths. Miners entered places that seemed to belong to non-human forces. They removed shining substances from darkness, risked collapse and bad air, and sometimes encountered preserved bodies, strange crystals, underground water, and unnatural silence. It is not surprising that mining cultures often developed stories of spirits, guardians, dwarfs, demons, mountain owners, or hidden beings who controlled the wealth below. Such stories could express fear, respect, labor discipline, or the moral danger of extraction. The mine was a workplace, but also a trespass into the earth's interior. Popular legends of hidden kingdoms, sleeping armies, buried cities, and secret masters often grow from real underground places, then drift far beyond the evidence. A blocked tunnel becomes a passage to another land. A sealed tomb becomes a treasure house. A refuge city becomes proof of a lost race. A natural cave becomes the entrance to a kingdom under the mountain. These stories should not be mistaken for archaeology, but they should not be dismissed as meaningless either. They show how deeply the underground grips human imagination. The earth hides things. Therefore, people imagine that it may hide anything. The more grounded truth is powerful enough. Ancient people lived with visible proof that the world continued below the surface. They buried their dead there, found water there, extracted metals there, hid from enemies there, painted animals there, and built sacred chambers there. Myth did not float above these experiences. It grew from them like mineral deposits in a cave, slowly, layer by layer, shaped by fear, memory, and wonder. The underground world became a mirror of everything humans could not fully control: death, wealth, fertility, danger, time, and the possibility that what disappears may not be gone, but waiting beneath our feet. The underground is often rediscovered by accident. A farmer notices that the ground sounds hollow beneath a tool. A child follows cold air through a crack in a wall. A builder breaks through a floor and finds steps dropping into darkness. A city crew repairing pipes discovers an older channel below the modern street. Archaeology sometimes begins with survey grids, permits, careful excavation, and years of research. But the hidden world beneath ancient civilizations has also returned through chance, rumor, collapse, and ordinary work. The earth keeps secrets for a long time, then gives them back without ceremony. This moment of rediscovery can be thrilling, but it is also dangerous for understanding. A sealed chamber, a buried passage, or a newly opened tunnel arrives without its original context. The people who made it are gone. The surface settlement above may have changed many times. Later communities may have reused the space, robbed it, filled it, widened it, prayed in it, hid in it, or forgotten it completely. By the time modern eyes see the chamber, it may carry centuries of mixed evidence. What survives in the record suggests a story, but the story is rarely simple. Local knowledge is often the bridge between disappearance and rediscovery. Many underground places are never truly lost to the people living near them. Villagers may know of blocked passages, dangerous caves, old wells, or rooms under houses long before scholars arrive. Families may use old chambers for storage. Shepherds, farmers, monks, miners, and builders may preserve practical knowledge that never appears in academic books. Modern archaeology has sometimes failed to respect this knowledge, treating sites as if they came into existence only when officially recorded. The hidden underground world often survives first in local memory, even when its ancient purpose has become uncertain. At the same time, memory changes. A real tunnel can grow longer with each retelling. A blocked chamber can become a royal treasure vault. A refuge can become a secret city of impossible size. A drain can become an escape passage used by kings. A quarry can become a temple of vanished masters. These transformations are not always deliberate lies. They are how mysterious places attract meaning. When people cannot see the full extent of an underground space, imagination completes it. Darkness is generous to rumor. This is why underground archaeology requires patience. Excavators must move slowly, not only because the spaces are fragile, but because interpretation is fragile too. A chamber's floor may hold pottery, bones, ash, seeds, tool marks, plaster fragments, lamp soot, animal dung, collapsed stones, or later rubbish. Each detail matters. Radiocarbon samples must be connected carefully to the activity being dated. A piece of charcoal may belong to original construction, later occupation. Medieval reuse or modern disturbance. A wall painting may be centuries younger than the chamber containing it. No single explanation fully accounts for many underground sites until layers of use are separated, and sometimes they never can be separated completely. Tourism adds another complication. Once an underground place becomes famous, it must often be made safe and legible for visitors. Lights are installed, paths are cleared, railings appear, entrances are widened, signs explain what scholars think each room may have been. This makes the site accessible, and access can fund protection. Yet the ancient darkness becomes a managed darkness, and the underground becomes a route rather than a risk. The pressure to tell a clean story can be especially strong. A guide must name a room, a documentary must create a sequence, a sign must fit in a few sentences, so uncertain spaces become kitchens, churches, stables, prisons, initiation chambers, secret schools, royal escape tunnels, or treasure rooms. Some identifications are well supported, others are plausible but uncertain. Scholars still debate many of these labels because architecture alone does not always reveal function. A niche might hold a lamp, a ritual object, a storage jar, or nothing at all. Fringe theories thrive in this uncertainty. They often begin with a real difficulty. A site is large, old, complex, or poorly understood. From there, unsupported claims rush in. The builders become lost races, giants, refugees from Atlantis, extraterrestrial visitors, or possessors of suppressed technology. These stories can seem attractive because they offer instant wonder and remove ambiguity. But they also take achievement away from the real communities who shaped the stone, maintained the tunnels, and lived with the consequences. Ancient people did not need impossible machines to carve underground worlds. They needed knowledge, time, need, organization, and hands willing or compelled to work in darkness. Modern technology has changed the search for hidden spaces. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, 3D scanning, microclimate studies, residue testing, and careful mapping allow archaeologists to detect voids, record fragile surfaces, and study use without destroying as much evidence. In cities, engineers and archaeologists increasingly work together because construction constantly threatens buried layers. A subway line, parking structure, or foundation trench may reveal ancient drains, tombs, wells, or tunnels. The modern city does not sit beside the ancient underground. It often sits directly on top of it. Yet even with technology, the underground resists complete certainty. Instruments can show a void, but not always its meaning. A scan can detect a chamber behind a wall, but cannot tell whether it is a tomb, storage room, collapsed cavity, or unfinished cut. Entering may damage it, not entering may leave it unknown. Preservation and discovery are sometimes in conflict. Archaeology is not simply the act of opening everything. It is also the discipline of knowing when not to open, when to record, when to wait for better methods, and when to admit that curiosity is not the same as care. Rediscovery therefore creates a new responsibility. The underground world is not only an object of fascination, it belongs to living landscapes, local communities, descendant peoples, national histories, and fragile environments. A tomb is not merely data. A sacred cave is not merely an attraction. A refuge is not merely a puzzle. These places carried human fear, labour, grief, and belief long before they became sites on a map. The most honest rediscoveries do not strip away mystery, they refine it. They remove the easy fantasies and leave the deeper questions intact. Who cut this passage, and under what pressure? Who waited here in darkness? Who carried water through this channel? Who placed offerings in this cave? Who sealed the dead behind this stone, hoping the closure would last? The underground does not need exaggeration. Its silence is already vast enough. The deeper the underground world becomes, the more tempting it is to treat it as a solved riddle. A tunnel has a direction, so it must have had a destination. A chamber has niches, so it must have had a ritual use. A blocked passage suggests secrecy, so it must have hidden something extraordinary. A city lies beneath a city, so it must have been built in a single age of crisis. Yet archaeology rarely permits that kind of certainty. The evidence below ground can be beautifully preserved and still incomplete. It can show where people moved, where they cut stone, where smoke blackened ceilings, where water flowed, where bodies rested, and where doors were sealed. But it cannot always tell us what people thought they were doing, how often they did it, or whether the same space meant the same thing from one century to the next. Dating is one of the hardest problems. A carved chamber is not easy to date by itself. Stone does not carry a convenient year of cutting unless inscriptions, tool marks, associated objects, or organic materials provide clues. Charcoal from a lamp may date a visit, not construction. Pottery on a floor may date abandonment, reuse, or dumping. A burial can be inserted into a chamber that is already ancient. A tunnel can be widened long after its first passage was made. In many underground sites, the question is not simply when was it built, but which part was made first, which part was altered later, and which objects belong to which phase of use. The evidence remains incomplete because underground places are rarely frozen moments. They are accumulations. This is especially important for large complexes. When visitors see an underground city, a catacomb, or a network of tunnels, it is easy to imagine a single grand design. But many such places grew gradually. One chamber becomes two. A storage room becomes a refuge. A refuge gains a chapel. A water channel is blocked and reused. A tomb corridor receives new burials. A mine follows a vein, then changes direction, then collapses, then is reopened by later workers who do not remember the first phase. No single explanation fully accounts for such places because no single moment created them. They are histories in stone, and those histories can be untidy. Function is equally difficult. Modern categories divide spaces neatly: home, temple, tomb, mine, drain, storehouse, refuge. Ancient use was often less tidy. A cave could be a shelter in one generation, a ritual place in another, a burial ground later, and a tourist curiosity much later still. A cistern might become a prison in memory, even if it was never designed for that purpose. A tunnel beneath a fortress might have carried water, allowed escape, supported drainage, or served several purposes over time. Scholars still debate many interpretations not because they lack imagination, but because too much imagination can become a trap. A responsible reading must stay close to what the evidence can bear. There is also the problem of absence. Underground sites often preserve what was durable and lose what was not. Stone walls remain. Wood rots unless conditions are exceptional. Textiles vanish. Food residues decay. Spoken instructions disappear entirely. If lamps were carried away, only soot may remain. If sacred objects were removed during abandonment, the chamber may look empty and ordinary. If a community cleaned a refuge after using it, the most important evidence of fear and survival may be gone. Archaeology must often interpret silence, but silence can mean many things. A lack of weapons does not prove peace. A lack of inscriptions does not prove illiteracy. An empty room does not prove an empty purpose. Modern expectations can distort interpretation. People today often assume that complexity must mean central planning, that depth must mean secrecy, and that secrecy must mean something forbidden. But ancient communities built complex things for practical reasons, and many underground spaces were not secret to the people who used them. A water tunnel needed maintenance, a burial chamber needed visitation, a storage room needed access, a refuge needed shared knowledge. The mystery is not always that no one knew these places existed. Sometimes the mystery is how later generations forgot what earlier generations had used plainly. At the same time, caution should not become denial. Some underground works are genuinely astonishing. The scale of Cappadocia's refuges, the precision of qanats, the density of catacombs, the depth of mines, the acoustics of ritual galleries, the persistence of cave sanctuaries, all of these demand respect. Explaining them through known human methods does not make them less remarkable. It makes them more remarkable, because it returns achievement to the people who actually lived with stone. Darkness, water, and danger. The unsupported claim of a lost superior technology often seems to enlarge the past, but in truth it diminishes it. It refuses to believe ancient communities could solve difficult problems with observation, labour, and inherited skill. Competing explanations are strongest when they account for both physical evidence and human context. A defensive interpretation should explain blocking stones, narrowed passages, storage, ventilation, and historical instability. A ritual interpretation should explain offerings, restricted access, symbolic placement, repeated deposition, and cultural belief. A water management interpretation should explain gradient, plastering, channels, reservoirs, and maintenance. A burial interpretation should explain bodies, grave goods, sealing, spatial organization, and treatment of remains. The strongest interpretations do not rest on one dramatic clue. They gather many small clues until a pattern becomes more likely than its rivals. Even then, certainty is uneven. Some claims can be made confidently. Ancient people carved, stored, buried, mined, prayed, hid, and moved water underground. Many sites were reused. Geology shaped design, warfare, climate, belief, economy, and death all drove people below. Other claims must remain tentative. Exact population numbers in refuge complexes, the full meaning of prehistoric cave images, the original purpose of some deep chambers, the route choices of certain tunnels, and the emotional experience of ancient rituals cannot be reconstructed completely. What survives in the record suggests possibilities, not total access. This limit is not a weakness of the story. It is part of its truth. The underground world teaches humility because it preserves so much and still withholds the center. A hand cut a wall, but the hand is gone. A lamp smoked against a ceiling, but the face beneath it is gone. A doorstone sealed a corridor, but the fear behind it is gone. A tomb held a name, but the name may be erased. The evidence brings us close enough to feel the ancient world breathing below the surface, but not close enough to own it. So the hidden underground world remains a place between knowledge and mystery. It is not a blank space for fantasy, and it is not a solved machine. It is a layered record of human adaptation, damaged by time, sharpened by survival, and complicated by reuse. Its darkness is not empty. It is simply honest about what history can and cannot reveal. The legacy of the ancient underground world is not buried as deeply as it seems. Modern cities still live above hidden systems, just as ancient cities did. Water pipes, subway tunnels, storm drains, sewers, service corridors, foundations, basements, bunkers, utility lines, storage vaults, and archaeological layers form a second city beneath the visible one. People walk over it every day without thinking about it. They cross streets above drains that keep floods away, sleep above pipes that carry water and waste, work in towers anchored by foundations reaching into old ground, and travel through tunnels lit by electricity rather than flame. The materials have changed, the machines have changed, and the scale has changed. But the old truth remains that civilization depends on what it hides below. Ancient subterranean spaces make this dependence visible because they strip it down to essentials. A qanat carries water without spectacle. A cistern stores the future in darkness. A refuge chamber admits that the surface can become unsafe. A tomb insists that memory needs protection. A mine reveals the cost behind wealth. A sacred cave shows that humans have always looked beneath the world for meaning. These places are old, but they do not belong only to the past. They expose patterns that continue in modern life, even when the modern world covers them with concrete, asphalt, glass, and noise. We still build downward when we fear heat, war, storms, crowding, contamination, collapse, or forgetting. The modern bunker is perhaps the clearest descendant of the ancient refuge. It belongs to a different technological age, but it answers the same fear the open world may fail. During wars, bombardments, political unrest, and nuclear anxiety, people have dug shelters, reinforced basements, command centers, and underground networks meant to preserve life or authority when the surface becomes unlivable. Some are public shelters, others are private. Some protect civilians. Others protect governments. Their existence shows that advanced technology has not freed people from ancient vulnerability. It has only changed the scale of the danger. The stone door of Cappadocia and the blast door of a modern bunker are separated by centuries, but both express the same uncomfortable thought: survival may require disappearance. Water systems also continue the older story. Modern cities often take water for granted until something breaks: a drought, flood, contamination event, broken main, failed pump, or overwhelmed sewer can remind millions of people that urban life is only as stable as its hidden infrastructure. Ancient engineers understood this in their own terms. They cut channels, plastered cisterns, dug wells, and maintained drains because settlement without water management is a temporary arrangement. No single explanation fully accounts for why some cities endure while others decline, but water is almost always part of the answer. Beneath the streets, then and now, water decides how long civilization can keep its promises. The underground also preserves memory in ways the surface cannot. Surface buildings are demolished, rebuilt, conquered, renamed, and repurposed. Underground spaces may be sealed and forgotten, but that forgetting can protect them. A street may change above a Roman drain, a church may rise above older tombs, a modern apartment block may sit near ancient foundations. Beneath long-inhabited cities, time does not lie flat, it stacks. Archaeologists working below streets often find that the present rests on medieval layers. Roman layers, Iron Age layers, Bronze Age layers, and sometimes prehistoric traces deeper still. The city becomes less like a map and more like a vertical memory, with every generation building on the compressed remains of another. This layered memory can be inconvenient. It slows construction, complicates planning, and forces modern societies to decide what they value. A tunnel for transport may threaten a burial ground. A new foundation may cut through ancient walls. A drainage project may reveal fragile artifacts that cannot simply be moved without loss. Scholars still debate how best to balance preservation and development, because cities are living places, not museums frozen under glass. Yet the problem itself is revealing. The ancient underground world is not gone. It interferes. It interrupts. It asks the present to notice that it is not the first world to occupy the ground. There is also a psychological legacy. Underground places continue to attract fascination because they gather opposite meanings. They are safe and frightening, hidden and revealing, practical and sacred, silent and full of human presence. A tunnel suggests escape, but also entrapment. A cave suggests origin, but also death. A tomb suggests loss, but also preservation. A mine suggests wealth, but also suffering. This tension is why underground discoveries still seize public imagination. When a chamber is found behind a wall, when a tunnel opens under an old city, when a sealed tomb is entered, people feel that history has not merely been studied, it has been physically breached. The past seems to breathe out of the earth. But the most important legacy may be humility. Ancient underground spaces remind us that civilization is not only what it displays. Monumental architecture can mislead by making power appear solid and permanent. Underground architecture tells a quieter story. It shows preparation for scarcity, fear of invasion, respect for ancestors, dependence on water, hunger for minerals, and the need to create meaning in darkness. It reveals that ancient people were not distant abstractions. They were communities managing risk, memory, labour, and hope with the materials available to them. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives is enough to make them startlingly recognizable. The fragile surface civilizations built above these hidden worlds often believed they were permanent. Many of them were not. Capitals shifted, languages faded, temples lost their gods, roads fell out of use, fields dried or flooded, empires broke into provinces, then into ruins, then into stories, yet below, parts of their deeper architecture remained. A cistern still held darkness, a catacomb still carried names, a tunnel still followed its gradient, a mine still cut into the vein. A cave still waited with smoke marks on its ceiling. The underground did not save every civilization from collapse, but it preserved evidence of how hard people tried to endure. To follow ancient civilizations below ground is therefore to see them without the illusion of invulnerability. It is to understand that the surface was always exposed to climate, enemies, hunger, decay, and time. Beneath that surface, people carved out second chances. They built cool rooms against heat, channels against thirst, tombs against oblivion, shelters against violence, and sacred chambers against the terror of meaninglessness. The hidden underground world is not separate from civilization. It is one of civilization's most honest forms, because it begins where pride gives way to necessity, and where the human desire to survive meets the patient darkness of the earth. And so the story settles back into the ground. Above the ancient tunnels, life continues. Grass grows over collapsed rooms. Roads cross buried drains without noticing them. Houses stand where older houses once stood, and beneath their floors, older thresholds wait in the dark. The world on the surface is always moving, always rebuilding, always forgetting just enough to keep going. But below, time changes pace. Stone does not hurry. A blocked passage can hold its silence for 1,000 years. A cistern can keep the shape of vanished water. A tomb can preserve the last careful gesture of people whose names no longer survive. The hidden underground world of ancient civilizations is not a single secret waiting to be solved. It is a pattern of human life pressed into earth: fear, hunger, thirst, labor, devotion, grief, and endurance. People descended because they had to, and because they believed something waited there that could not be found in daylight. They stored grain for winters they could not predict. They cut channels for water that might fail them. They buried their dead where memory could take root. They hid from armies when courage alone was not enough. They entered caves to meet the unknown, and mines to pull wealth from stone, knowing the earth could give and take with the same silence. What remains is incomplete, but perhaps that is why it holds such power. The underground never gives everything back. It offers walls without voices, passages without footsteps, chambers without the smoke and breath that once filled them. It lets us come close, then reminds us that the past is not a possession. It is a place we enter carefully, carrying only a small light. Above every buried world, the sky has changed many times. Empires have risen and passed into dust. Rivers have shifted. Fields have dried, returned, and dried again. Languages have vanished from the mouths of the living. Yet somewhere below, a tunnel still holds its curve through stone. A chamber still waits beyond a sealed doorway. A carved step still remembers the weight of feet descending into darkness. And in that final image, there is something quiet and lasting, not a lost world separate from our own, but the underside of civilization itself, patient beneath the surface, reminding us that human history was never built only upward toward the sun. It was also carved downward into shadow, where people placed the things they most needed to survive, to remember, and to believe.